going to interview, as Rachel said, Lucy Peppiatt. So if you give a round of applause to Lucy, she's going to come and join us. Now, Lucy is a leading voice. She is a theologian, and she is a prolific author and theologian. And she holds, I read in the notes that you hold multiple degrees. How many degrees do you actually hold? 4 degrees. And she used to be the principal theologian at the Theological Centre, and now currently oversees CrossNet Church. And we are so grateful that you are here and we can basically pick your brains, and we're really excited about that. And we've actually got a couple of books here to show you. So you've written this one. Anyone seen this before?
That's actually my personal copy.
It is. Rachel's reading this right now.
Swiped from my bedside table.
It's Rediscovering Scripture's Vision for Women. And another book that I saw you've written is Unveiling Paul's Women, Making Sense of 1 Corinthians. And so we just wanted to, firstly, before we're going to talk about Martha, aren't we? And Rachel's going to introduce what we're going to be speaking about today. But I just wanted to first start to hear a little bit more about you. You've written these books. You teach all over the place. Could you give us, firstly, an idea of what's the heart behind this? What's been your story? What has led you to this point?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with you guys. Also, just before I forget, I do have some books on sale, which Sally Tate, my wonderful colleague there, will sell them to you if you would like them over there. So I started to study theology in my 30s because I was preaching quite a lot, and I was sort of convicted really that I didn't think I knew enough when I heard other people teaching, and I thought, if I'm going to preach, I need to learn. So I started my theological journey in my 30s while I was bringing up my children, and then that took me into a PhD in systematic theology, which is Christian doctrine. And probably about the beginning of that, or at some point, I wanted to just sort of be a theologian, really, in the church and to serve. And I felt God speaking to me about speaking out about women in the church, and I didn't want to do that because I thought, I don't want to be one of those kind of women, and you'll probably understand that.
Oh yes.
But it was a very clear call, and anyway, I went on to write my PhD, which had nothing to do with women, and then I got my job at WTC, and I was the principal of a college, and realised that evangelicals had a lot of issues around women, and as a scholar I couldn't just sit there and sort of say, well, I don't do that, I don't really have a lot of sophisticated answers for that. And so I felt, as a female Christian and a scholar, that I realised there was an enormous amount of pressure, both from God and from the world I lived in, to do my own research. And so that's what I started to do. And as I did it, I think I had I'd been brought up in a home where there'd been absolutely no hint of any difference between the men and the women in terms of what they could do or how God saw them, and my husband was the same, and all our church context really had endorsed that for me. And then as I came to the scriptures sort of in earnest and as a scholar, I saw nothing in the scriptures that talked about any God-ordained submission of women. And so I wrote about that.
Amazing. And in many ways, what we want to do now is apply some of that learning to the specific bit in Scripture. And as we said at the beginning, we're doing this podcast series, and each episode we're taking on a Jesus encounter. And so the series is called Jesus Meets. And we've been looking at these encounters that Jesus has with different women in the Gospels, and it's been super exciting and edifying and encouraging, just to realize again how Jesus treats, empowers, dignifies women in the Bible 2,000 years ago, in a culture that was vastly different to our own in the status of women. And so we're going to be looking at Martha this morning. Love Martha. Actually, I was thinking, I relate to, I feel like I am a Martha. We were laughing because I'm Martha and Amy's Mary. So we walked into the tent this morning, and Amy's like, oh, what do you sense like God is doing? What do you sense God is saying? And I'm like, are the chairs right? We need to get the chairs sorted. Is the sound all right? Is everything? And he's like, yeah, no, I know, but do you sense what God's saying? We just need to worship Jesus. I know, but are the chairs arranged? Is everything organized? So I'm Martha. Amy's Mary. It's probably, I don't know, but
that's very kind.
Well, but I love Martha. But Martha is amazing, and so we're going to jump in, looking at Martha. And so just to bring a little bit of context, we meet Martha 3 times. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. We meet Martha 3 times: Luke 10, John 11, John 12. And some of these, I'm sure, these moments will be really familiar to you. But just to remind you, we meet Martha in Luke 10, and it's the iconic moment where Jesus and the disciples have come to their home. So Martha lives with her sister Mary and her brother Lazarus, and Jesus has come with the disciples. And Martha's busy getting all things ready. And Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet. We're not going to talk about that, even though that is amazing, but that's for another episode. It's Martha that we're interested in this moment. And she's like, Lord, can you sort my sister out, basically? He says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work? Tell her to help me. And Jesus is like, Martha, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Then we jump to John 11, and again it's the well-known bit where Lazarus has died, and Mary and Martha send word to Jesus, and he's in a different part of, geographically in a different place, and they're like, our brother is dying, we need you to come. And Jesus doesn't come. And so then we read that Jesus comes a couple of days later, and again there's this amazing dialogue moment between Jesus and Martha, and Martha's like, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And then Martha answers, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Is what Jesus says to Martha. And she says, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And then Jesus has this moment with Mary, and then Jesus raises Lazarus from the tomb. And I love it. Again, Martha, ever the practical one. She's like, he's been in that tomb for 4 days. Have you not thought this through, Jesus? It's going to stink. And Jesus is like, it's okay. I've got this, Martha. Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And then Jesus rises Lazarus from the dead. And then we jump to John 12. And Martha is also in this scene, and it's the moment 6 days before the Passover. And again, an iconic moment where Mary, her sister, pours the perfume, anoints Jesus' feet with this perfume. And Martha's there in that moment, serving, we're told. And so we're going to explore these 3 questions in the context of those 3 encounters. And the 3 questions we're going to look at, what do we learn about her? And this is where we're looking to Lucy. to bring some real flesh to the bones here, to give us a deeper understanding of these encounters. What do we learn about Martha? Bearing in mind, again, the context, the cultural context at that time. And then we're going to ask, what do we learn about Jesus? What does this tell us about Jesus, the way he interacts with her? And then finally, what do we learn about ourselves? So that's the plotted journey. And then we're going to pray for one another. And so let's jump into that first question. Hopefully that has set the scene for us. So Lucy, what do we learn about Martha from these three encounters?
I think one of the places I want to start, and this ties in with the whole question of women, how women are taught the Bible and how women read the Bible. And one of the things that I noticed is that we miss things because there are certain assumptions that function before we even come to the text. And one of the things that I realized, so I started my studies in 1 Corinthians 11, 2 to 16, and one of the things that I realized after reading many commentaries was how quickly people assumed that women were a problem. And I was really shocked by that, by the prevalence of that there was a sort of assumption that women needed to be corrected. And actually, I think this is a play when we read the story of Martha and Mary, because in one sense, that potentially we see a rebuke in this story of Jesus, who says to Martha, 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 you're worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. Ouch. You know, and you feel it. You're like, oh, Jesus, don't be mean. She's doing your food, you know. But so we have a kind of assumption, a narrative that, well, of course Jesus is telling her off because she wasn't doing the right thing. And I would like to just push that aside for a minute and say, why don't we come to the text from a different place and remember that Jesus and Martha were very, very, very good friends. Yeah. They were really close. And there's a clue that they were very close in the text and the text tells us that, so we're not making it up, because Luke tells us that it was Martha that welcomed him into her home. So it's Martha's home. She's the head of this home. I actually think Martha was the eldest. We don't know out of the siblings with Martha, Lazarus, and Mary who was the eldest, but I'm pretty sure it must have been Martha because otherwise Luke wouldn't have said. Otherwise it would have been Lazarus who'd welcomed. So already Luke is subverting a patriarchal narrative here by saying it was Martha who welcomed him into her home. And he's just telling this story right after Jesus teaching about sending out 72, and he says, go to people's homes, and if they welcome you, stay with them. So she's like the model disciple because she's there saying, oh, Jesus, come in, I'll take you in. Jesus, I think, stayed in Bethany. Whenever he went to Bethany, he would have stayed with the Martha family, and they were great friends of his. So, and then the other clue that they are great friends is because she appeals to him to talk to her sister. So, because he's her friend. You know, Jesus, please, can you help? And he uses that as a moment. I think there are so many astonishing things in this story, which again we miss if we come to the story thinking this is about two sisters who are having a Barney and they're trying to get Jesus to sort them out. And there are so many narratives that I think you'll be familiar with, that when you hear and you think, yeah, I thought the story was about that. It's not about that. The story's about these two sisters who are very close to the Lord. And they relate to him in different ways, which is exactly what we see in John 11 as well, and in John 12. So I see this as an interplay between two very good friends. And Jesus it's actually an invitation to Martha. It's an invitation to her. It's saying, look, I know you're worried. I know you've got things on your mind. I know where you're at. But you could sit too. You could be there. Your sister's okay with it. I'm okay with it. You can come and be a disciple in this way as well.
Well, even the fact that Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet is pretty controversial, isn't it? So again, it's Jesus saying, empowering Mary, that even though she's chosen to do something that's a social taboo, it's saying, Martha, no, you could also do this, right? You could also subvert culture and come and be a disciple as well, which is amazing, actually, isn't it, that Jesus would do that?
And also, as the man, not saying, oh yes, can you serve us?
Exactly, yeah.
So I think there's many wonderful things going on in the story which we'll miss if we come with our preconceptions.
Amazing.
So moving on then to, what we've loved so much, haven't we, going through these women, is honestly what we've learned about Jesus. You know, the ways, like you're saying, that he dignifies and upholds and pulls out, and it makes me emotional thinking about it, because it has been such a beautiful journey to learn more about the character of Jesus and how he sees women. So what do we learn about Jesus in this particular, these three interactions? Like, what does it say about him in this situation?
I see different things. Well, there's the Lucan story of Martha and Mary, and then John. Should we go to John? Yeah. So John 11 is I think it's just such a powerful interaction between, especially Martha and Jesus, and I think. It's just one story. There are many stories of Jesus speaking with women very intimately. The woman at the well, obviously, is another one. And the fact that he was willing to confide in women and to explain to women who he was. And really, one of the most powerful things that comes out of... So in John 11... Martha and Mary are grieving, and it's an awful story. It's so sad, they've lost their brother, and what's amazing is they both say exactly the same thing to him. Lord, if you had been there, if you'd come, they'd sent word for him, and he hadn't come. So the sense of betrayal must have been very deep as well, and I think that's why Mary didn't go. I think it was too much for her to face him. So she stays at home. But Jesus is arriving. They know he's coming. And I actually think Martha's very courageous to go and face him. And then also tells him off, So Jesus takes it. The fact that this is where we see their friendship. That, first of all, she's asked him to do something for her, in her own home. And then when he's coming, she goes straight out to him, and she tells him off. What on earth were you doing? Why didn't you come and save him? And so that tells us something about him. Yeah. The fact that these women were so comfortable with him that they weren't scared of him. They were just able to talk to him like a friend. And then they have this extraordinarily intimate exchange where he said, let me just find where she comes in. So Martha heard that Jesus was coming. She went and met him while Mary stayed at home. And Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But then says to him, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. So she makes an amazing declaration of faith to him. And he says, your brother will rise again. And she says, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And then he claims that reality for himself. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And that's astonishing when you think how famous that claim is. I'm the resurrection and the life. It's said at every funeral, and these were the words that were spoken only personally to Martha.
I mean, that is amazing, isn't it?
It wasn't to the crowds, it wasn't to the disciples, it wasn't on the cross. It was, this is a personal exchange with her, and it is one of the greatest declarations of the Godhead of Jesus. And she, and then he says to her, this is in her grief. And he says to her, do you believe this? And she's angry with him. And she says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. It's just incredible. And I think that shows us something deep about Martha and deep about Jesus. So, to my mind, they were, in a strange way, more intimate than Jesus and Mary. Although Mary has this different temperament, where all the emotions are out there. And I think Martha is a much more controlled person, which is why she could go and meet him and Mary couldn't. And then Mary comes out, and because Martha goes to get her and says, basically, you need to come now. So she goes. So I think these two stories tell us something about both of them, which are just wonderful.
So I guess my question then would be, in light of that, in light of the fact that Martha has total confidence to go and speak so directly to Jesus in a public space, which again would have been potentially culturally risky, controversial, I don't know. How do you then, and I know we've only got a limited time and you've written books on this, but how do you then marry that up with Paul's letters? How do you marry that up with some of those really potentially difficult passages in Scripture, Corinthians, Timothy, where what can be interpreted is, and the words are there, women be silent. You've got on the one hand, you've got Jesus, King of the universe, Messiah, Savior, and you've got Martha who just freely speaks to him, speaks her mind, speaks openly in a public space, and then flick a few pages further, a few chapters, a few books on in the Bible, and you've got what seems like this instruction that is silencing women. How do you marry those two up? How do we get our heads around that as women?
You have to do your own reading. You have to do your own work and your own homework. I've done my homework and I've written it down for everybody so they can answer. That's a complex question that requires a complex answer. And the answer is that the whole Bible, and that's why I said in the beginning, and when I say things like, there is no narrative of a God-ordained submission of women to men in the Christian scriptures, people want to know, why does she think that? Why do I think that's true? I know that's true because I've studied the scriptures and church history and the meaning of the texts And that's true. But you can't go around saying, oh, Lucy Peppiatt thinks. You have to know why that's true. And the only reason you're going to be able to work out why it says this here and that there, and why that there doesn't negate this here, is when you do your own work.
Challenge accepted.
There you go, Rach.
Challenge accepted. No, I mean, I have.
No. I know you have.
Well, this is
but
it.
I'm just saying, you won't get the answer out of me in 5 minutes.
No, but I think that's actually really, I was hoping that you might give us like a 2-minute synopsis, but fair enough. Because actually you're right. I knew for me, it wasn't in my plan, my sort of life plan to preach or to teach in a church context. I never wanted to work for a church. I was in the media, I worked for the BBC, I loved it. And then God called me to work for the church. And it was a bit like you. We grew up in a family where our parents were like, the sky's the limit. You know, there was no difference. We've got 2 brothers as well. It was just like, you run after the dreams that God has placed in your heart. And so it was only for me, actually, when I stepped into a church context that I was like, oh, what? I can't go into that meeting because I'm a woman. What? I can't do that role because I'm a woman. It was so weird for me. And then God started to open up these opportunities for me to preach and to teach. And again, I was aware of these factions of the church that categorically interpreted that as wrong. You know, I was going against scriptural instruction. And so I really needed to understand it. I mean, I haven't got lots of degrees and I haven't got a doctorate, but I really needed to understand it for myself. And so again, just to add to Lucy's homework instruction, I think we need to do this. As women, if we want to be women who lead the way in bringing liberation, we need to understand. We need to understand the scriptures for ourselves. Love it.
So I wanted to bring out just on Martha, because we haven't gone to John 12, which I think is really interesting because we looked at Luke 10, where Martha's serving and wants Mary to serve. And here in John says Martha served. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served. And Lazarus was one of those at the table with him, with no judgment there. There's not Martha was doing the wrong thing while Mary was worshipping Jesus. But it's so fascinating here that a second gospel writer brings out the difference between these 2 sisters, and there's Martha serving. And I was just thinking about it because I knew we were going to talk about it, and I was thinking, but serving is a deeply Christian principle, and Jesus serves. Jesus talks to his disciples in Luke 22 and says, who's greater, the one who sits at the table, the master, or the one who serves? Clearly the one who's sitting at the table, reclining. So Lazarus is behaving like a man. Martha's serving. And then Mary comes and does this amazing thing. But Jesus says, but I am among you as one who serves. And then I was thinking about Acts 6, where the apostles, the Hellenistic Jews are getting upset because the Hebraic, the Hellenistic Jews are being sidelined because the Hebraic Jews are being prioritized, the widows, so the women are being looked after differently. And what they decide is to appoint 7 men to serve the widows. That we don't talk about that very much. 7 men are chosen to do the serving. And because the other apostles say, well, why should we serve at tables? Because we're supposed to be out preaching the word. So we'll get some men to serve at the tables, and then some men doing the preaching. But in church life, it's the women who serve it, but the men were serving, and Stephen was appointed as the kind of head person and becomes the first Christian martyr. So Stephen's a hero, and Stephen is serving widows at tables, following Jesus, because Jesus served at tables. So there's nothing inherently wrong with Martha serving. Do you see what I mean? I'm just sort of kind of looking at this and thinking, we just need to be careful what we're bringing to this text.
And is it again, thinking about that moment where Jesus says Mary has chosen what is better, is it also perhaps helpful to think that actually almost Jesus' objective is to value what Mary is doing, not to devalue what Martha is doing? Does that make sense?
Yes, that exactly makes
almost
sense.
Actually, what Martha is doing is already acceptable.
Exactly.
Like that's just the norm. And so in a sense, he needs to rebuke Martha to lift up and place value on what Mary is doing specifically, which is so helpful for us now as well, isn't it? Right? Because
exactly. And I don't think it's the serving that's the problem. I think it's the worry.
Yeah.
I think it's the worry, that she's fretting. And she's bringing her fretting to Jesus. And I think that's probably the...
You're looking at me.
Write that one down. We've got a few minutes left, haven't we? Obviously, we can apply so much of this to ourselves. But one of the things that, just as you were speaking, that sort of even was highlighted as you were speaking, is this idea of we just see how honest she is with Jesus, you were saying, and so raw. And I see, pastoring people, how it's hard for people to be really honest in prayer, really honest with Jesus. Can you just speak into that a little bit more? Like, what is it? What holds us back from being as honest as Mary and Martha? And then how could we be encouraged to move forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One of the things that I hear, or I notice a lot, especially I think with evangelical women, but maybe it's across the board for Christian women, is a worry about their value to God. And I think that the damaging narratives of women just being a little bit below men, or a lot below, depending on where you've come from, it's so insidious and damaging. And I think that honesty before God comes when we know how much he loves us and how much he values that. If you really, really think you can't do anything wrong, well, you've done everything wrong anyway. You know what I mean? You've done that, and you're going to do it, and he knows that. So if the truth of your forgiveness has sunken in, and the reality of grace, which I don't think I've learned. Sometimes I think I haven't even begun to understand the depth of what grace means in my life. But when we know those things, we know we're coming to a Father who loves us. And if we know we're coming to a Father who loves us, and the Son who gave his life for us, and the Spirit who lives in us and is going to help us every single step of the way, and never leave us and never forsake us, and the truths of God are written into our hearts, then the honesty, there won't be anything else but honesty, because we know who we're coming to. So I would say that, and this is why I love doctrine, I love teaching doctrine, because it's all about who we think God is. It's all about God's nature, who we think God is and how he works in the world. And if that's all we dwell on through the scriptures, it will bring us to wholeness. Good theology will heal you.
So, just one last thing, and then we're going to pray. It was actually something that we both struck us when we had a conversation with you a few weeks ago, because in some ways, I guess the oppression of women, not just in the church, but globally, in many ways, and we see this across different lines, not just gender lines, but there can be like a power struggle, can't there? And there can be like, and we see this in some parts of feminism, the way that it's expressed, sort of almost like this militant redressing of power, You know, we've got to get the power back. We need the power back. And whilst, I mean, you can probably tell, it runs deep within my veins, this desire to see women empowered. At the same time, I also have to hold on to the fact that Jesus models power in a completely upside down. And it's Amy's picture of the weak army. You know, that it's this sense that we are commissioned, we're empowered, but Jesus models the laying down of his life. You know, it's the lion and the lamb. It's the lamb that was slain. It's what does that mean? And you used this phrase with us when we chatted. You said this is not about justice. It's about reconciliation in terms of men and women. Maybe just a few sentences on that, because I think it's so important as women, as Christian women, to model power in a different way.
Yeah, thanks. I was just saying to Amy before we started that I think it's really important to tease out two separate issues that have a huge impact on women. And one is a justice issue about the effects of the damaging effects of global oppression of women through what we call patriarchy, which is male dominance. And there are nations in this world where women are, you know, legislated against, where they don't have access to education, where they're excluded, where they are oppressed and abused. And those are justice issues, and men and women, and especially Christians, should be vocal and fighting on behalf of those women and the children affected. In the church, the church is mirroring, to some extent, the dysfunction of the world when it decides to subjugate women. And that's not the gospel. The gospel is a different message for women and for men. And it's a beautiful message. And it's something that the church has the opportunity to model, is the healthy, whole, balanced, mutually empowering relations between men and women. In whether you're married or not married, doesn't matter, siblings, you know, colleagues, also husbands and wives, etc. And that looks like reconciliation. That looks like there's no bitterness between me and you, because and we'll get. I think we three, in our own ways, have experienced that in our lives. I think we are enormously privileged women, and I'm constantly grateful for that in my life, for the men who have given up places for me, who've, you know, championed me, who've put me forward. And you can tell when women have had that in their lives. And I think that's what God wants for us, for the women and the men. But we have to lay down our weapons for that to happen. And I believe it will. It is happening.
Amazing. I don't know about you, but I've got a lot to take away from that. Can we just give Lucy a massive thank you?